Boldwood presents The Cold Killer, written by Ross Greenwood and read by David Thorpe. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. The happy family is a myth for many. Caroline Spring. Chapter 1. D.I. Barton, November 2019. Barton's mouth salivated in the queue at McDonald's. He was next in line and could almost taste the Big Mac meal he was about to purchase. DS Sean Zander stood beside him, and he was also grinning. When life challenged Barton, Barton headed for McDonald's, and, at least for a while, all was right with the world. Barton felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. He slipped it out and answered the call. Detective Inspector Barton speaking. He listened for a moment, then frowned. Can you say that again? Did you say saw? Barton's eyes widened. OK, location, please, he said. He repeated the street back. Westwood Park Road. Is that the address I think it is? Control confirmed that it was. Brilliant, Barton replied without enthusiasm. Zander and I will be at the house in 5 minutes. Remind whoever reaches the scene first not to attempt any heroics. Nobody approaches until we arrive. Keep the neighbours in their houses. Barton stared at the milkshake machine with pained sorrow. But he'd be back. Well, he hoped he'd be back. It wasn't every day he took a call like this. Come on, Zander. I've received an urgent call. Zander quickly strode after Barton, and they got in Barton's pool car. At 11:15 a.m, the traffic was light, meaning blues and twos were unnecessary. What's happened? Asked Zander when they were on their way. Do you remember the film Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Yes. Well, Peterborough might be having one right now. Chapter 2. D.I. Barton. Barton knew with his colleagues driving they would be at the scene in less than 5 minutes, so he spent the time quickly running through with Zander what Control had told him. Right, he said. A woman heard shouting outside her house and looked into next door's front garden from an upstairs window. She could see her neighbour threatening an old man with what she called an electric saw. Why are we involved? Aren't uniform dealing? They're en route, but there's a burst water main next to the car park near the town bridge, so we've been requested to attend. They know I'm always interested when it's to do with Mr. Spencer. How long for armed response? Asked Zander. 20 minutes. The address was well known to both men. Archibald Spencer lived there. He had been one of Peterborough's most notorious and elusive criminals for around a quarter of a century, and he was a real blot on the department's record. They'd caught and charged his cronies, cousins, and even his son a few years back, but nothing ever connected directly to the main guy, and no one would dish the dirt on him. 5 years ago, an ex-girlfriend had grudgingly offered to assist an investigation, but she'd vanished. You didn't need to be a detective to guess her fate, but Archie, as he insisted on being called, had been in Spain since the week before she disappeared. Let's hope we get him banged to rights. It'd be weird if we got him for arguing over something like overhanging trees, said Zander. Maybe his lovely wife Poison has finally driven him mad. Barton smiled as Zander curled his top lip at the thought of meeting the delightful Evie. Meanwhile, Barton wasn't going to count his chickens. It definitely didn't sound like anything Archie would get up to on his own front lawn. Nothing was straightforward with this man. Decades ago, during a pub brawl, Archie spat in a young P.C. Barton's face, which led to Barton giving him a skull-juddering thump. The cheeky prick complained after, which resulted in the CPS deciding not to proceed with the case against Archie. It was only handling stolen goods back then, but Archie soon moved into the big league, and Barton had learned a lesson about losing control. Westwood Park Road was one of the richest parts of Peterborough City. You needed the best part of $1 million to live there, and Archie owned the biggest plot, which had huge iron gates to keep everyone out. They were open when the detectives arrived. The drive was winding and bordered by 3-metre laurel trees. It wasn't possible to see beyond them, and Barton swallowed as he heard a small engine revving from the direction of the house. A response van pulled up behind them. 3 young men in uniform got out and rushed over. Barton quickly explained the situation, and the officers looked nervous once he'd finished speaking. "You 3 stay here," said Barton. "Secure the street. Shut it 50 metres up each way for the moment. People can drive other routes without too much hassle. Nobody in or out until the ARV turns up. I'll keep control up to date." Barton grabbed a baton and some PAVA incapacitant spray from the boot of his car and beckoned to Xander to follow him through the wrought iron gates. Policing was never a fair fight, but this was ridiculous. Still, he suspected that an altercation involving a chainsaw wouldn't last long, although God knew what scene they would come upon. They strode down the tree-lined drive which bent around to the side of a big Georgian house. It was peaceful, just the sound of their footsteps, until the revving started up again, which was now louder and intermingled with shouting. The noise still sounded a little distance from them, and when they reached the end of the lines of trees, the 2 men who came into view were 50 metres away. Barton hadn't seen Archie for a couple of years. They knew he'd been up to no good in Puerto Banús in Spain because they'd heard rumours the drug squad had been sniffing around and Archie's name had come up. Archie appeared to have developed an addiction all right, but to food. The years had been unkind, but he was still tall and broad-shouldered. He looked like a bloated expat in baggy chino shorts and a Hawaiian shirt, whereas the white-haired old man opposite him was about 5.5 feet tall and frail. His ancient suit hung off his narrow frame, but, despite that, he waved the hammer he had in his right hand with real malice. Barton also detected a flash of steel in the left hand. Archie had the chainsaw revving and was prodding it at his foe to keep him at bay. "Stay back!" shouted Archie Spencer. "You deserve to die, Spencer, unless you talk." Barton opened his mouth but closed it again. The scene felt so unreal that it was hard to think what to say. "Drop your weapons!" roared Xander next to him. Barton and Xander stepped forwards but circled around the 2 men. The older man glanced over, but Archie kept his gaze and chainsaw pointed directly at his aggressor. Barton was familiar with the look of reckless desperation on the old man's face, but before he could shout out an order, the man turned and swung the hammer at Archie. The saw roared in reply. The hammer arced through the air, and Barton cringed when he saw there was a hand and forearm still attached to it. Barton and Xander hurtled forward. The injured man looked at his stump of an arm for a moment and staggered forward a step towards his assailant. Archie's eyes narrowed. Barton recognised the same evil sneer from when he spat in Barton's face all those years ago. "Back! Back!" roared Archie. A short woman, well overdressed for a Tuesday morning, appeared from around the rear of the house towards them. She stopped behind the combatants, glared, then hollered at the older of the 2 men. Barton couldn't make out anything over the roar of the revving chainsaw. The old man staggered another step towards Archie and raised the small knife in his remaining hand. Archie's face fell. Clearly, even he didn't relish what he might have to do. He took a big stride to the side, but could go no further due to a large statue of a horse. Xander was less than 10 metres away. Barton, 15. "No!" shouted Barton, Xander and Archie. The old man lurched forward, his remaining arms swinging. Archie looked away as he raised the saw, which Barton imagined tearing into the aggressor's stomach. Archie bared his teeth as the blade spun furiously. Xander was there and grabbed the wrist of the hand holding the knife, then yanked the man back. The saw blade spun in the air. Barton seized the biceps of the stump, and together they held the collapsing man up. Covered in blood, Archie held his weapon aloft in both hands. Then he turned to face the police. Chapter 3. The Cold Killer, Friday the 8th of November. It's Friday tea time. The smell of fish and chips pulls me out of my prison cell and I stroll towards the servery. I can immediately tell something's wrong. It's too quiet. I search the faces of the men who are lined up for everyone's favourite evening meal of the week. Nobody meets my stare, but that's not unusual. I stroll to the hatch where the food is passed out. I don't queue. I never have. The servery worker holds out his hand for my plate, which I give to him. The silence is like a building dark cloud while he goes about his business. I step back and peer up at the top landing. There are 4 youngsters in a line at the bottom end of the wing. They all have eyes on me as they lean against the railings. It's a modern group, white, mixed race, black and Asian. Peterborough's been a multicultural city for a long time, and in here, they all want a piece of me. Prison is normally a hive of activity, with a loud and constant, almost tangible noise. Prison is a sea of danger where the threat of violence rules the waves. The con behind the counter clears his throat. I step forward and take my plate off him, then stare down at what he's given me. The wing holds its breath. The right items of my meal are present. I have chips, fish, and mushy peas. But it's an average portion. And I'm not an average guy. I'm being mugged off in my own patch. At least, it was mine. Until today. I suppose I've always known this moment was inevitable. There have been harder, younger men around before who flexed their muscles and paid the price. But these lads look organised. I've been living off my legend, but today I will need to step up. I'm ready, always prepared. But I'm not the man I once was. I twist my wrist and frisbee the half-full plate towards the servery worker's face. He's ready for it and slips to the side, leaving it to splatter against the far wall. He twists to gaze at the dripping mess, but doesn't turn back. I hammer my fist into the plexiglass, causing it to crack. The queuing men on my right keep their eyes on the floor. A screw comes out of his office and looks around. Nobody moves. He's another one of the kids they seem to employ nowadays. Not a bad lad, but ill-suited to deal with a situation like this. He knows that and returns to his office. I walk back to my cell as the 4 men descend the stairs one by one. The other officer working the wing is older, 35 maybe. He's busy at the gate with meds, but his help isn't expected or needed unless they plan to kill me. He looks a flabby, unfit type, so I may not receive his assistance even then. His name is Peter Green, and pea green is the colour he turns when prisoners get in his face. He usually works on the nonce wing because those old fuckers aren't physical, so it's a mistake that they've put him here today. With what's about to occur, if the staff aren't on the ball, people might die. That's just the way it is. Prison violence is unique. There are no rules. Anything can happen when big men put everything on the line. But I have no choice but to fight. Even though the chance of me winning is slim, when you're behind bars, the key to survival is to be in the fight. Chapter 4. The Cold Killer. When I reach my cell, I hustle in and shut the door. There is a button that locks it from the inside. Officers' keys override it, but the other inmates can't just barge in. It buys me some time to prepare, but there's no point in delaying the inevitable. They'll only come for me tomorrow, perhaps when my back is turned. My padmate, Spenny, sits up on his elbows. He wears the prison grey tracksuit even though he's been here so long he doesn't have to. That was quick. Or wasn't the food ready? He asks. Neither. You remember the big lad that arrived last week? The heavy bloke with the long hair who you threw a comb at yesterday? That's the one. Well, he's outside with 3 of his mates. Spenny jumps down off the top bunk, steps to the door and looks through the observation panel. What are they doing? I ask. Just sitting on the pool table. Weapons? Don't look like it. I would say with 4 of them that size they won't need 'em. Spenny is a big lad, but not the sharpest. He reminds me of a young Herman Munster, but with rosy cheeks. Are you with me? I ask him. Spenny looks at the ceiling while he thinks. He's an unusual, joyless type, lacking a sense of humour, but with a similar history to mine. Except he nearly killed 3 people. He said it was a gang fight, and I suppose he had his reasons, but it's ruined the rest of his life and he's still only 24. I always wanted a son, but it's too late for any of that. So I've tried to help Spenny in a fatherly way, talk some sense into him. Sadly, Spenny is too far gone to accept any kindness. His emotions are blocked from being in prison for so long at such an early age. He rarely sleeps, although few do in here, not properly anyway. We just exist. When Spenny gets out, he will be a stick of dynamite waiting for the smallest spark, as I was. I've told him that spending your youth locked up is a waste, but it took me until I was no longer young to realise that. It's only now, as my power fades, that I understand there was another way. With my criminal record, I could easily request a single cell, but I prefer to share. Having someone else to talk to is the surest way to stop this place driving you mad. He has been reliable and useful in the past when I've needed backup, but this time is different. These men will cause real damage. Spenny takes his time with his decision. The way he squints his eyes while he thinks drags me back decades to a connection that Spenny doesn't know about, which is probably for the best. It's a big choice for him, but he understands this life. He went to a secure centre at 15 for armed robbery. I met him briefly in this jail when he was being transferred to a young offenders jail, having reached 18 years old. That was 6 years ago. He still has at least 2 more years to do, and then he'll be on licence until he dies. He's so firmly stuck in the system that only death will free him of it. Spenny agreed to share my cell because I was the top dog on the wing. Drugs, coercion, bribery, whatever. It's all on me. I'm in control of the racket. Or I was. Of late, I've become exhausted and bored with everything, tired of life. And Spenny realises things are shifting. The men outside understand that too, which is why they are here. It's a shame, seeing as I'm out in a few weeks. If Spenny stands by my side and we fall, he loses big. Prison management wouldn't return us to main location, and he's got years to serve. Standing there, in front of me, in his baggy tracksuit and with his thick hair sticking up, he reminds me so much of his dad. Poor Spenny. He didn't stand a chance being raised by that wanker. Spenny pulls himself back up to the top bunk and shrugs at me. Sorry, mate. You're on your own for this one. Chapter 5. The Cold Killer. I was expecting him to say that, but it's still a blow. Perhaps, like prison officer Peter Green, I'm losing my bottle. Or maybe I'm just getting old. I've spent my entire life fighting, and the tear-up that got me this 6-year stretch only stopped because my hamstring went. It was a lucky escape for those who I was educating on the error of their ways. I suppose it was to be expected that the judge would believe them, but I was surprised Barton did. Him and me go way back. I thought Barton was sound and he understood me. He'll understand my displeasure when I get out of here. It's true, I'm a man who likes a scrap, and often I'm to blame, but when I'm guilty, I plead guilty. The trial was a stitch-up. It's been a long 3 years this time. I've not had a single visitor in all that stir, nor received a single letter that wasn't official. As for the judge and jury, I don't hold a grudge against them. They merely took the Crown's view. Even so, the judge's statement when it came to sentencing went straight through me. I brushed the words off at the time, but I've had over 1,000 long nights to consider them. The summing up is still vivid in my mind. I see you before me again, as I have many times over the years, unrepentant, unforgiving, unashamed, and a danger to others. Yet this time you forced a full trial, despite damning evidence of your guilt. That will cost you. Not only have you wasted your own life, but you've also ruined other people's. Do you have anything to say before I sentence you? For once, I lost my temper. With my teeth bared, I snarled my reply. I was born to fight, but the system took that from me. You stole my future when I was barely an adult, and still you misjudged me. If I was responsible for the injuries to these idiots, I would have admitted it. They brought it on themselves. But they are rich, like you, and so you choose their side. They needed to learn a lesson and pay the price. So you're the judge now. Better me than you. The judge stared down at me without anger, which gave his words much more power. He gently pushed his glasses back up his nose. Only you can change your ways, he said with a sad smile. If nothing else, consider your legacy. How will you be remembered? Who will remember you? Choose to end this cycle. With that in mind, I'm giving you 6 years to think about it. If you come before this court again for something similar, you risk losing your freedom forever. The bloody judge was right. I chose this life. Only I can decide to be something different. I reckon that's what made this stir the hardest. Perhaps it's the truth that has weakened me, not the years. The conclusion I've reached, though, is that it's too late for me to change, so I'll go out on my shield. I take my shoes, jeans and buttoned shirt off and pull on tracksuit bottoms, a tight T-shirt and my trainers. It's the modern warrior's uniform. I drag out the huge plastic bag with HMP Peterborough on it from under my bunk and place my belongings in it. There's not much, but win or lose, I won't be sleeping here tonight. If I pack it now, it'll save the staff a job, and they'll just bring it down to the block without breaking anything. The 4 lads are still outside. I won't have to really deal with all 4, though. 1 or more of them will be along for the ride, and when the scrapping starts, they will be straining a muscle while loitering at the rear. In fact, I know the Asian fellow is due on the next open prison ship-out. He won't want to blow that cushy number. And the black guy only has 1 eye. I suspect he won't be too keen to get that near my fingers. The mixed-race lad looks as if he's involved under sufferance. In fact, there's something eerily familiar about him, but I can't quite put my finger on it. That only leaves the ringleader. Now, he reminds me of myself when I was his age. He's cocksure. His right hand has formed a fist, and it swings loose next to his body, as though he's brandishing a heavy mace. I suspect it would do similar damage. These kids are young, but they know about my reign of terror here, so they'll be expecting me to come out all guns blazing. They would have presumed Spenny would stand beside me, hence the numbers. The big guy looks confident and will think he can easily take me, so he'll expect me to go for one of the others first. They'll be overconfident, being mob-handed, but this is prison. Nobody fights fair, so you can be as dirty or ruthless as you feel is necessary. It's the end result that's remembered, not the method of victory. I will attack the strongest man because I don't want him behind me having a free pop. When he's down, maybe I'll have a chance. I undo the lock and edge outside. It's like musical statues on the rest of the wing, and the record has ended. The 4 who are here for business step forward. I spot Officer Green alone at the wing gates. Our eyes meet and he strides towards me, but then he ducks inside the office and closes the door. I glance from left to right. The white and mixed race pair have reps already here. The white guy is sometimes referred to as K or Special K, and the other is G. They are sometimes referred to as the KGB, but I don't know who or what the B is for. The black guy has his head tilted to one side like a one-eyed meerkat, subconsciously protecting that eye. He and the Asian kid, who has an amazing moustache for someone so young, look composed. A shimmer of doubt flickers through my mind. And then we're on. I thrust forward 2 paces towards Meerkat, with my fingers pointed towards his face. They all lean in, and that's their first mistake. When my right foot lands, I push off hard to the left and explode. I've thrown some quality punches in my time. You know as soon as they land if you've timed it correctly. This one is perfect. It lands plumb on the spot between Kay's top lip and nose, and a jarring thud shudders down the length of my arm. My back spasms as I'm sprayed in blood. He slumps to the floor. I'm just a little too slow to lift my guard in place as Meerkat hurls himself at me kung fu style. My ribs crack under the impact of the kick, while G shuts my eye with a jabbing strike. My final thought, before the lights go out, is that I was wrong about these men, because they all get stuck in. Moustache walks forward as I double over, and his knee fires up towards my chin. I wake up with the feeling of being in motion. I'm in a bright white vehicle with a woman in a green uniform standing over me. I have a handcuff on my wrist, which I assume is attached to the prison officer sitting on the seat opposite me. That's the least of my problems. My right eye is shut and has the sensation of someone rapidly inflating a bouncy castle in my head. Darkness descends once more. Chapter 6. D.I. Barton. Xander and Barton both retreated from the spinning saw blade, but after a few seconds, Archie dropped the chainsaw and silence fell. A pigeon cooed from a nearby tree. "I was just about to tell you to stand back and that I'd sort it," said Xander to Barton as they laid the injured man on the grass. Barton smiled as he kept the grip from his huge hand iron tight around the mangled arm stump. The blood had at least stopped squirting out, and this man would survive, even if his life would be harder. Barton suspected for him to be here in this situation, his life had already been damaged beyond repair. Archie looked shocked now the adrenaline had left him. His wife Evie walked up to her husband, stared hard at his face, then burst out laughing. "I'm arresting you for attempted murder," said Xander to Archie as he got out his handcuffs, even though Barton knew that it would never stick. Evie strode towards Xander, who'd finished cautioning Archie. "It was self-defence!" she screamed at him. "Shut it, Evie," ordered Archie. "We don't talk to the police." Xander pulled his phone out and rang control. "Situation safe. Send the ambulance straight in. Amputated limb, and instruct uniform from outside the property to enter as well. This is a crime scene." He stood and approached Evie. "You are also under arrest as an accessory to attempted murder." "I've done nothing," she spat. "Enough, Evie. Keep your mouth shut," growled Archie. "We'll be home by dinner time." Barton still couldn't quite believe what had happened. He took a deep breath and remembered who he was. "Are you both okay?" he asked the husband and wife. Archie nodded. "Get them out of my sight," said Barton to Xander. Barton's nose wrinkled at the terrible smell coming from the victim, who appeared to have lost consciousness. At least his chest was still rising. The ambulance crew were there in seconds, and the patient was soon on his way to hospital. Somehow, Barton and Xander remained free of blood. It felt like one of those scenes where a crazed gunman fires an Uzi from a couple of meters away and yet no one gets hit. Once the scene was under control, Barton returned to the station and prepared his team to interview Archie. His lawyer arrived within the hour, which was impressive and meant there wouldn't be much delay. Barton had left Xander back at the house to process the scene. The old man was easy to identify because he had his wallet in his pocket. Barton half recognised the surname, and the computer soon told him that the injured man was the father of a known criminal who had gone missing around the same time as Archie's ex-girlfriend. Barton preferred to let others do the interview if he knew the suspect well, so he could watch from another room. D.S. Kelly Strange, who was his best interviewer, took D.C. Lester into the interview room with her and went through the formalities. He'd expected Archie to look smug, but the gravity of the situation had affected him. Barton suspected he'd not been personally involved in anything so violent and gruesome for a long time. Barton knew Archie's solicitor well. The man always exuded confidence despite the calibre of his clients. "My client has prepared a statement," he said, pushing a piece of paper over. "It's what happened in his own words. I'm happy to read it out loud for the benefit of the tape so we can have this matter resolved and have Mr. Spencer back home after what has been a shocking experience for him." Strange nodded. "I was out trimming some trees," said the solicitor. "Don't you have a gardener?" Strange asked Archie to see if she could interrupt or provoke Archie from what no doubt would be a well-rehearsed tale. I do, but I enjoy keeping my hand in, replied Archie. Strange gave him a hard look, then nodded at the solicitor, who continued. I'd opened the front gates for Evie to go shopping and gone back to trimming my trees. Then this old guy walks down my path and starts shouting at me. I can't hear him over the sound of the machinery. He gets really close, and then the hammer drops out of his sleeve. I tell him to fuck off. He shouts this name at me, reckons I know where his son is, whose name I don't recognise, and this makes him madder. You never knew his son? Interrupted Strange. I can barely remember my own kids' names nowadays, and I've pretty much retired from any involvement in my businesses now. They run themselves. I'm just a figurehead. Strictly legal, naturally. Carry on. I'll read it, said Archie, brushing away his brief's concerns with a wave of his hand. I pointed the saw at him and told him to stay back. He got his mobile out and tried to give it to me. I cut the engine so I could hear. He shouted that there was a picture of his son on it. I made him put the phone down and back away so I could safely look at it. As it happened, I did know the boy. He was a mate of my son's, who you pinned 3 attempted murders on, even though that was also self-defence. Funny how the world turns in circles, ain't it? Do you know the whereabouts of his son now? Asked Strange. Of course not. I told the fella that and he went bonkers. I fired the saw up to keep him away. He kept ranting and ranting. That's more or less when you turned up. He attacked me. What could I do? I repeatedly warned him. Barton massaged the sides of his temples as he listened to the story. Archie's son had almost killed 3 teenagers without provocation and had been given a life sentence despite being only 18. Self-defence never came into it. Unfortunately, Archie's explanation of today's events seemed reasonable from what Barton had seen. You didn't have to use the chainsaw. You could have gone back inside, said Strange. I regret that. I do. There's been too much violence over the years. I want a quiet time now with my Evie. I feel like an old man. You'll need to remain in our custody suite while we finish our inquiries, said Strange. There's one more thing, Sergeant Strange, said the solicitor. There's CCTV down the entire length of the drive and at the front of the house. State of the art, including sound. I'll have it to you in less than an hour. Barton almost smiled. Archie was right. There would be hours of questioning, but he might well be home for dinner. Chapter 7. The Cold Killer. Sunday the 10th of November. I've been in the prison healthcare department for 2 days now, slipping in and out of deep sleep and daydreaming about my distant past. For some reason, I keep rerunning my first real fight. It's as if my brain can't handle anything else until I've processed what happened back then. It was a day that changed me forever. The enemy had been stalking us, and they had double our numbers. It was inevitable they would catch us at some point. I was with Frank Xanthos and Archie Spencer. My mum used to shout, "Oh, Frank Spencer's here!" whenever they both knocked at our door for me when we were kids. It was by far the funniest thing she ever said. Strangely, some mothers do have them, is one of the few things that I can recall watching as a family. Frank used to call my mum Betty in reply. She liked Frank as much as I did. There wasn't anything about him to dislike. Maybe he is the only person I've ever loved. My dad was a wanker who shacked up with an Avon lady a few streets up from us. Every now and again he'd come around, ignore me, shag my mum and slip her a few quid. The arrangement suited us all. Frank was unlike anyone I'd met. He was kind and gentle by nature, and handsome to the point of beautiful. Yet, despite being much more intelligent than me and Archie, he was happy to get his hands dirty when there was trouble. We had played as boys, and we were becoming men together. It was his idea to attack first. Spencer, on the other hand, was less noble. Some children are like that, and growing up they just get worse. He scared even me a little. He possessed a ruthless edge that meant he could hurt without fear, and guilt was an emotion he didn't feel. He made a brilliant soldier. We waited for the enemy hidden in some bushes atop a rise. We expected them to come up the hill to search for us, but when they appeared they just stood around and lit cigarettes. They were about 50 metres down the slope. We looked at each other, drew our knives, and I hefted the axe I'd made specially. We ran at them. It was beautiful. Even now, half conscious, I can remember the pure joy and vitality I felt. There were no nerves, only my drumming heart and the blood pounding in my ears. Frank and I even had time to exchange a smile. To our foes' credit, they recovered fast and were ready for hand-to-hand combat. I threw my axe and it went sailing past their heads. I slipped past the blade shoved towards my face and, like a cold killer, plunged my knife into his stomach. The fight ended up as a free-for-all, with people jabbing and slashing in all directions. We took significant blows, but they eventually retreated, leaving us battered and bloody on the grass but victorious. Despite my injuries, the feeling of belonging and brotherhood erased any feelings of pain. I knew then that I was born to be a warrior. We pulled ourselves to our feet, and with arms around shoulders, trudged back to our homes as the sun set. I understood, down to my very bones, that to always win, you must leave nothing out there. Fear must be pushed aside. It was better to die in glory than live in shame. We were only 11, and the weapons were wood. Our enemy was just 2 years ahead of us at school, but our futures were set. Tragedy was already in the wind, and betrayal was close behind. Chapter 8. The Cold Killer, Monday the 11th of November. I'm pleased when I wake the next day because both my eyes open. The vision is a bit blurred through the swollen one, but I feel more normal. My ribs are tender, but apparently only one has a very small hairline crack. It's my jaw that hurts the most. The doctor at the hospital said I was lucky it didn't shatter. The prison hospital ward has 6 beds in it, but only one other is occupied. It's more or less a large prison cell. The metal grey door is locked at night, and the windows are permanently barred. I've heard the other patient groaning and farting throughout the twilight hours, and I suspect he's listened to me doing the same. Last time I was in this part of the jail, they gave me one of the 8 single cells because of my record. I expect it will be a while before I'm a danger to anyone. My stomach rumbles, which is another good sign. I press the emergency alarm, and a minute later an older officer strolls in. He looks familiar, but his hair is flecked with grey now. The staff must age as fast as we do. What took so long? I could have been having a heart attack. I was watching you on the monitor. I look to where his finger points and note a camera in the corner of the room. Many like it are spotted all over the prison. In fact, Peterborough is a purpose-built jail, so there are very few blind spots. Big Brother is watching. My arse needs wiping. Nasty for you. My coffee's getting cold. Anything else? Just the breakfast menu, please. The officer's eyes narrow in annoyance. Then he shrugs it off and sits on the bed next to mine. OK. You have a choice of cornflakes and that's it. Perfect. And tea, please. There's little to be gained by pissing the staff off, especially in my condition. The man in the far corner of the ward lets out a groan of agony followed by a whimper. All I can see sticking out of the covers is a shock of pure white hair on the back of his head. What's wrong with him? He's dying. Been here for months. The officer raises his voice. It's God torturing him for the things he's done. With that, he stands to leave. At the ward door, he stops and looks over at me. I'll send the orderly in when he arrives. One of the managers is coming over to chat to you in 20 minutes. He leaves the door open, so it must be at least 7:15, and, apart from the sobbing opposite me, it's peaceful. Some prisoners try to blag their way into healthcare, as you can't be bullied on here, even though it's often full of nutters. Most inmates, in general, are a little bit mental, and this place gets the cream of them. I can't get to sleep again with the whining from the other occupant of the ward. I manage to swing my legs out of the bed and, with a shuffling technique that gives me a terrible warning of things to come, I make it to the toilet. My piss is light pink, which is an improvement on the Chianti I was doing in the urine bottle yesterday. At 8 o'clock, just as I'm dropping off, someone clears her throat beside me. It's a woman in a crisp black suit. Everything about her is sharp, including her gaze. She pulls up a seat and sits down next to my bed, putting our eyes on the same level, which surprises me. I've no idea how old she is, but judging by her creamy complexion and lack of lines, not very. Her long blonde hair looks advert fresh. She is pretty and poised, making me feel old and broken. With luck, I could have had a child her age. I'm Jenny Clearwater, head of male residence. I've come to talk to you about your assault, she says. This type of thing isn't acceptable in our establishment. We aim to throw the book at those responsible. You do what you have to do. She shifts in her seat slightly and breaks eye contact. Then she gets a notebook out. What happened that day? Why don't you tell me what you think happened? Well, that's the thing. We don't know. There was a camera malfunction. By that, you mean it was tampered with? Yes. Someone put hair gel or something similar on the lens. We know the identity of one of the men involved, although he was injured too. Unfortunately, the staff on the wing were in the office. I can guess who the other attackers were, but I need a statement. You must know I'm not going to grass. Why waste your time? She reaches over and pats me on the hand. I had to try. So, just to confirm, you have no comment. I glance from one perfectly made-up eye to the other. My non-compliance is good for the prison management. This way, the incident won't affect their official statistics. Can I put a complaint in? I ask, Her face alters a few millimetres into a frown, and I instantly recognise what got her promoted so young. I like a steel core, and if I was 10 years younger, I'd fancy a bit. The thought makes me laugh, which tests my ribs. "What do you have to complain about?" she says with a raised eyebrow. "The old guy over there is ruining the atmosphere in here. Can't he go and die somewhere else?" "Ah, you mean Mr. Battersby? We keep him in this ward because it's easier to tend to his needs. The other single cells are all full, so we need you out of here now that you seem better." Better is pushing it. Am I going back to the wings? "Security has word that if you return to normal residence, you will be killed. So no, we have a single cell on the VP wing with your name on it." You want me to go with the nonsense? No way. I'll take my chances. It's a wing for vulnerable persons, hence the name. Not just sex offenders, which, in your present condition, is you. You wouldn't last 5 minutes in your state on main residence with a bounty on your head. I thought you said I was better. Bollocks to that. Put me in the block. I've got less than 5 weeks. I'll do it cold. Her smile is ice. Obviously that's your call. However, we have little space in separation and care either, and there will be no TV in your cell. 5 weeks will feel like 100. Think about that. Then tell one of the officers here what your answer is and he'll arrange it. In the meantime, I'll let Birch and Crane know that you might be staying with them in the near future. I can't help laughing as she leaves. I'm really starting to like this woman. Birch and Crane are 2 block officers who have been here since the jail first opened. Time has not mellowed them. I had a right row with a pair of them when I came in 3 years ago. Birch got a nasty elbow and Crane a low blow. My returning welcome over there would leave me limping, or worse. I lie back and close my eyes. They reckon I have to stay in a bail hostel when I finish this sentence, which is exactly what I don't need. People like me, living with other people like me, only leads to trouble. But I have no choice, and I don't want to be injured when I arrive there, which is likely if Birch and Crane get their chance for revenge. Doing your porridge without a TV is bad as well. I haven't been right mentally on this stretch as it is. Hours on end with nothing to do might turn me into one of the ones I pity. Battersby makes another moaning sound. Can't you be quiet? He startles me by slowly sitting up like Dracula rising from his coffin. He's surprisingly lucid and well-spoken, but his eyes are yellow and the skin hangs from his face like a basset hound's. I'm dying. Show some respect. Well, like you showed your wife all those years ago. He frowns for a moment, then decides he doesn't care. My reputation precedes me, I'll say. How long ago was it? 20 years? The Sun called it one of the coldest murders in history. Why do that to her? Why not just kill her? I didn't really have a good answer to that during my trial, which is why I was told that I would die in prison. I've spent a long time thinking about it all since. The truth of the matter is, I had come to despise her because she had become an evil woman. It seems strange now, because we used to quite like each other. Battersby had walked into the local police station to tell them he was murdering his wife. When they asked when, he said one word: currently. Officers raced to his house, where they found her submerged in the bath. He'd knocked her out, gagged her, tied her to a wooden chair, then left her on her back in the bath. Before he departed to confess at the cop shop, he'd turned the tap on half a twist. "I don't understand. Didn't you want to get away with it?" "I'd had enough. I hated my job, my wife, obviously, and we had no children. I'd been meeting youngsters through escort sites and attacking them. Mentally, I had unravelled. The net was closing in. There was Zip to look forward to. Anyway, the chances of getting away with that kind of thing nowadays is remote. I planned to end it all afterwards, so it didn't matter much." He stops talking, grits his teeth and arches his back, as though an alien is about to burst from his chest. His hands become claws. Tears pour down his cheeks, but he remains silent. "I suspect you regret not following through with that," I shout over at him. After around 10 seconds, he relaxes and flops backwards onto the bed. "Yes. Dying in prison is no fun, but is it ever? To my surprise, I have a strong will to live. Even now, I resist the inevitable. The thought of my wife's last few moments gives me strength. This agony is almost worth it. But there is one thing that's difficult to bear." "What's that?" "The knowledge that I won't ever touch young flesh again." I can hardly believe what he's saying, and it takes a lot to surprise me. He gasps, then convulses, and I hear a bubbling mixture of water and air. The smell hits me a few seconds later. I press the call button to let the officer know that I'll be happy to move to the VP wing after all. Chapter 9. D.I. Barton. Barton had spent the day on his first aid refresher course. He usually looked forward to them because it was an opportunity to catch up with people he'd worked with for decades. This time, though, the instructor was new. When Barton asked after Larry, who had run the sessions since Barton first joined the force, the woman who'd replaced him shook her head sadly. Larry had cancer. He wouldn't be coming back. That set the theme for the day, and Barton felt quite maudlin when he returned to his desk to check his emails before he left for home. He rapidly deleted the first, which was trying to sell him cryptocurrencies. How in the hell had they got his police email address? Next, he'd be getting stuff about winning the Spanish lottery and penis enlargement potions. He had an email from his dentist cancelling his appointment again, and there was one from Holly reminding him to confirm that Xander and Strange were coming to theirs for lunch soon. Barton paused and thought of his mother. It was her idea for the meal, but Barton wondered what version of his mother would be present. Dementia was so cruel. The next email was titled in capital letters, Danger. It was from his boss, DCI Cox. Work had been a little boring of late, not that Barton longed for terrible crimes, but what they'd had lately had been bitty stuff, which stopped everyone getting stuck in and working as a team. He pulled his chair forward and opened the email. Cox had forwarded the message to him after one of her MAPPA meetings. MAPPA stood for Multi-Agency Public Protection Arrangements. It was the process through which various agencies, such as the police, the prison service and probation, worked together to protect the public by managing the risks posed by violent and sexual offenders living in the community. The email had initially been titled Coming Soon. Someone clearly had a dark sense of humour. It was a list of sex offenders who were coming to the end of their sentences and may be released into the local area within the next 12 months. Barton's eyes scanned down the list of names. He knew them all. Some he had arrested and charged himself, others had been dealt with by the other detective team or by child protection, but everyone in the building would know their names. A few were notorious, with their faces gracing the national papers at the time of their court cases. Barton rubbed his chin. Cox was right. This was danger. Barton had been doing the job long enough to know that when he saw a list like this, their workload always went up. It was a feature of the British legal system. Unlike other places around the world, such as America, where over 100,000 convicts were unlikely to ever see the light of day again, there were only around 75 men and a handful of women in the UK who had been given whole-of-life orders. That meant that around 15,000 prisoners were set free each year back into the community. Most would not have been adequately rehabilitated. The first two on the list were actually deported that morning. Sanchez and Ramos were career burglars who also raped old people in retirement communities. Real scum of the earth. But at least they were now Portugal's problem. Some of the other names on the list had done things that were even tougher to contemplate. Many people thought that child rapists should be sent to jail for the rest of their lives, but Barton guessed the average sentence they received would be around 15 years. Down the list were Xanthos, Balanchine and Pfeiffer. Barton shook his head in amazement. Was it already 12 years since they were caught? Barton believed in the police and in the legal system. Few mistakes were made, but he was also aware that when people went into the prison system, there simply wasn't the money to effectively work with all of them so they were less likely to reoffend when they were released. In his view, violent men and sex offenders rarely changed their spots. Savage men often grew up in angry households and played in streets of violence. The most violent and ruthless survived and prospered. It was learned behaviour. Prison only reinforced that way of thinking. When these men were released, they were already on the back foot. They had no money, poor job prospects and sparse support. The only thing they'd have an excess of was anger. They felt they had little to lose. The sex offenders were in some ways worse because their behaviour was usually innate. If you looked at a toddler and became sexually excited, there was little hope for you. And 20 years in prison weren't going to change that. Until very old age arrived, men and women who thought like that were as dangerous on the morning they were released from prison as the day they had arrived in prison. Barton could understand not wanting to give too many people a sentence without hope, but what was common among paedophiles was their lack of remorse. Sure, they felt regret, but people like that never considered their victims. As the song went, they were only sorry they got caught. Xander was walking past, so Barton grabbed his attention. "Hey, look who's leaving Her Majesty's Hotel Peterborough." Barton edged away from his screen so Xander could read the email. Balanchine, Pfeiffer and Xanthos, Cranach, Thompson. "Great," said Xander. "Was Khan the one who was dumped by his girlfriend, then deliberately crashed his car into a field as he drove her home, which ended with her being decapitated?" Barton nodded. "I despise Thompson," said Xander. Barton agreed. Thompson